Winter had locked the forest into silence. Snow lay heavy on the branches, bending them low, muting every sound except the wind that cut through the pines like a blade. In a clearing above the tree line, where no roads were meant to go, a steel cage stood bolted into frozen ground. Inside it, a German shepherd waited. His breath came shallow, each exhale turning to frost before drifting away. His body trembled, not from fear but from the slow failure of warmth. Someone had chosen this place carefully. No witnesses. No mercy. Just time and cold working together. When the Navy SEAL found him, it wasn't by chance. Ethan Cole had learned long ago to trust discomfort before evidence. The Forest Service road had felt wrong that morning. Too quiet. Too orderly. At 42, Ethan moved with the restrained efficiency of a man who no longer needed to prove strength. His truck idled behind him as he stepped into the clearing, boots crunching softly. He saw the cage. Then the dog. The shepherd didn't bark. His ears were upright, eyes alert, tracking Ethan's movement with disciplined focus. That alone told Ethan everything. This wasn't a stray. This was an animal trained to wait, to endure, to survive without complaint. Frost clung to the dog's black and tan coat. One front leg barely touched the floor of the cage. The metal bowl inside was frozen solid. Scratch marks lined the steel where claws had tried uselessly to escape. Ethan knelt slowly, meeting the dog's gaze. There was no panic there. Only assessment. A soldier's look. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, familiar and unwelcome. He spoke softly, voice even. The lock broke with a muted snap. The cage door creaked open, protesting movement it hadn't been meant to allow. The dog hesitated. Freedom, it seemed, had become unfamiliar. Then, carefully, he stepped out. His legs shook under the weight of exhaustion. Ethan removed his jacket and draped it over the dog without thinking. When he lifted him, the shepherd was heavy with muscle, light with starvation. As Ethan turned toward the truck, the dog twisted his head back toward the trees, ears lifting despite the cold, eyes fixed on the dark forest below. Ethan paused. He had learned to respect moments like that. Signals without words. Whatever had been done here wasn't finished. Not yet. He carried the dog down the ridge, unaware that freeing one life had already set something much larger in motion. Ethan's cabin sat at the edge of the forest, practical and unadorned, built for isolation and long winters. He laid the German shepherd near the wood stove, feeding him water in careful amounts, watching the tremors ease slowly as warmth returned. The dog accepted help but never relaxed fully. His eyes tracked every movement, ears flicking at the smallest sound. Dr. Lena Morales arrived within the hour, her breath fogging the air as she knelt beside the dog. Hypothermia. Dehydration. An old fracture in the front leg, healed wrong and never treated. She traced a faint groove around his neck where a collar had once pressed too long. He was restrained for weeks, she said quietly. And before that, trained. That night Ethan slept in a chair by the stove. The dog slept in fragments. Every creak of wood brought his head up. When wind rattled the chimney, a low warning rumble vibrated in his chest. Ethan said nothing. Trust was not built with reassurance but consistency. By morning the dog could stand. He positioned himself instinctively between Ethan and the door, between Ethan and the windows. When Ethan reached for a coil of rope near the wall, the shepherd froze, hackles lifting. Ethan set it down immediately. The reaction faded, but the meaning didn't. Ethan gave him a name that afternoon. Ranger. The dog's ears twitched. He didn't turn, but his posture softened by a fraction. 2 nights later, Ranger nudged Ethan awake and moved toward the porch, body rigid, focused. Outside, half buried in snow, lay a steel trap. Fresh. Its chain disappeared toward the tree line. Tire tracks marked the road, still sharp. Someone had followed them. Sheriff Tom Keller arrived before noon, his expression darkening as he examined the trap. "We've had reports," he said. "Illegal logging. Poaching. Nothing solid." His gaze shifted to Ranger, who watched him steadily. Until now. That evening, 3 men came to the cabin. Work jackets. Polite smiles. They said they were looking for their dog. Ranger stepped forward, silent but immovable, eyes locked on them with unmistakable recognition. Ethan felt the truth settle heavily. Ranger hadn't been abandoned. He'd been discarded. When the men left, their friendliness gone cold, Ethan knew the forest itself was part of the story. Ranger wasn't just surviving it. He was remembering it. And memories like his didn't fade quietly. They surfaced. They led. And they demanded answers. Ethan and Sheriff Keller returned to the ridge at dawn. Ranger moved ahead without a leash, choosing paths that avoided open ground, nose low, body angled to the wind. He stopped at a shallow hollow beneath wind-swept branches and sat. Beneath the snow, they found traps, fuel receipts, coded notebooks, and a trail camera aimed at a frozen creek. This wasn't random cruelty. It was infrastructure. State wildlife agents took over within days. Patterns emerged. Timber removed from protected land. Traps placed to clear wildlife. Crews rotating just fast enough to stay invisible. Ranger reacted sharply to the smell of gasoline and the sound of chainsaws on recordings, then steadied himself, cataloging instead of panicking. Pressure followed. A corporate representative arrived with documents and thinly veiled threats. Ethan refused the money. The forest didn't accept bribes, and neither did he. That night, Ranger led Ethan to a hidden logging site along the creek, tarps concealing fresh-cut timber, cameras wired to trees, traps set in widening circles. They were almost gone when headlights exploded through the trees. A truck surged forward, horn blaring. Ethan moved on instinct, shoving Ranger into cover. Ranger broke from concealment and ran directly across the headlights, forcing the driver to swerve. It was a trained maneuver. Draw attention. Create space. Disappear. Shots cracked the night. Bark splintered. Snow erupted. Ranger led Ethan through darkness and terrain, choosing silence over speed, memory over panic. They escaped because Ranger knew how men hunted. He had learned the rules when survival demanded it. The evidence broke the case open. Arrest followed. The logging operation collapsed under scrutiny. But the forest didn't celebrate. It simply breathed. The town gathered days later, divided at first, then quieter as truth surfaced. People spoke. Names were given. Roads were mapped. Ranger stood at Ethan's side, steady and visible, a living witness no one could dismiss. By winter's end, volunteers formed patrols. Traps were removed. Wildlife corridors reopened. Ranger healed slowly, his limp less pronounced, his sleep deeper. One evening, Ethan dismantled the steel cage piece by piece, bending the bars until they could never close again. Ranger watched, then lay down, satisfied. The forest still carried scars. But it also carried memory. And this time, memory had teeth, a voice, and 4 steady paws walking beside a man who chose to stop and look. The morning the final arrests were made, the forest stood bright and exposed beneath a pale winter sun. Trucks rolled in marked and official, lights flashing without apology. Steel traps were dismantled, cameras bagged, timber reclaimed. The men who believed cold erased evidence were led away quietly, their certainty gone. Ethan stood at the edge of the trees with Ranger beside him. The dog watched every movement, not tense, but attentive. When a trap snapped open harmlessly, Ranger flinched, then relaxed. Fear wasn't gone. It was being rewritten. The town didn't cheer. It adjusted. A local guard formed, not to punish but to protect. Patrols rotated. Supplies were shared. Reporting became safer. The forest became everyone's responsibility again. Ranger walked point on the first patrol, choosing a longer route that avoided fresh snowdrifts and hidden ground. 10 minutes later, they found another abandoned trap. Prevention, not rescue. That was the shift. Spring came slowly. Ranger's coat regained its shine. His sleep deepened. Sometimes at dusk, he stood by the window, posture formal, ears high, watching the trees. Not because danger was present, but because presence mattered. Ethan understood then. The miracle wasn't just survival. It was alignment. A town choosing honesty. A forest given witnesses. A dog whose suffering became knowledge instead of silence. On the final cold morning of the season, Ethan and Ranger stood on the porch together. The ridge held its line of trees. The cage was gone. The snow thinned. Some miracles arrive loudly. Others come quietly, wrapped in frost and patience. One decision to stop. One life saved. One forest that remembered it didn't have to stand alone. Ranger stayed at Ethan's side, not because he was owned, but because he had chosen. And that choice, like the forest itself, was finally free.